Okay, you know the title. It's an alternator for 1999 Toyota Solara. Should be the same for Camry. I'm going to try and make this a quick video. That's why I'm talking really fast. It's about as fast as I can talk. So anyway, the step, I've only done the first few steps. So the first step, of course, was to pop the hood. The second one was to put the prop rod in. Third one was to hit it and have it fall on my head. Fourth one was to put the prop rod back in because these struts really suck. Okay, disconnect the battery. That's just good because you're making connections here, and I'm not sure you don't want sparks and stuff like that. So in my case, this is getting pretty old and worn out, and I got new. I wanted that to stay out of the way. Disconnect the electrical connections here and here. This is a connector, and this is one that's bolted on. I don't know if you can see that, but I believe it's 10 millimeter. So it was a 10 millimeter, and once you take that off, just put the screw back on there and then leave that loose. When you're probably going to have to return the alternator for a core charge, and usually the new alternator has the nut on it, but it's a good idea to check that before you get rid of that nut. You might want to hang on to it just in case. A little hint on these connectors, they can be very tight just from friction, and sometimes if you push them in before you push this little tab to release it, and it'll come off a little bit easier, and also it'll be a little less stress on the tab. These things can get very brittle, and I have a feeling that I was lucky I didn't break that one just now, but that went pretty quickly. Now there's this whole sort of mounting here and a bracket that comes down, and on the side of the bracket coming in horizontally is a nut on the pivot point that'll loosen. Okay, so you can see now this magnetic pickup thingy, when you drop tools down the engine, is attached to that bolt down there. Okay, you're looking down on the alternator, right? There, I'm shining the light on it now. Okay, after you loosen the one on the side, and I don't believe you have to remove it, I think you just have to loosen it. Then you loosen this one on the front, and as you can see, it's made easier because I have one of these swivel thingies. But I was able to push this wire out of the way, so you should be able to get on there with maybe a deep well socket or just a very small extension. So I can already feel this belt starting to loosen. Now go ahead and remove that one on the pivot. And then you can take the belt off and just let it sit. This is a good time to be very careful with the belt. If your engine's really dirty, you don't want to get dirt on the underside of the belt where it comes into contact here, then it'll start slipping. So you want to keep grease off of that. Also, before you loosen that, you might want to take a look at how the belt is routed, because if it gets too loose, it may not go. You know, you may just put it on and find, oh, it's really loose, where did it go? And then you have to look all over the engine for how it routes. But usually under the hood somewhere is a thing that shows you that. My car's been repainted, so I don't have that. And I already loosened it because I'm stupid. And then basically you just pull it out. Okay. The loosening bolt on the bottom, you actually do have to remove that one, not just loosen it. Now, always make sure to drop a bolt or two while you're doing the job. You wouldn't be working on cars if you didn't. Now, as I recall, it's really hard to get it out because it's sort of bigger than the hole it goes through. want to say I turned it this way. Oops. Or you can drop it. Maybe you just manhandle it a little. I don't know. I got all that way. Next step is to compare the new one to the old one, or this one has something on it that says approved, so I guess it must be okay. Here's a little tip. If you want to, I like to save these zip ties, and so if you cut it off here instead of here, you'll get a short one. I know it may seem overly thrifty, maybe even cheap, but you'd be surprised when one of these little spare ones is long enough to do what you want it to do, but it's the right size. Like this one's really thin. That's very handy. I was actually looking for a thin one earlier. So you just throw away the tail. So it's shorter, but usable. All right, so I'm looking at the connectors here. They look right. The size looks right. The pulley looks good. Wow. This one spins super freely, and this one I can feel resistance, and I think that's the magnets in there. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, if that one is actually bad. So it also says triple tested, so you know it's good, right? The next important thing here is to look at these and make sure they're in the right locations. One of the ways to do that might be to roll them down that way, just to see if the distance here is the same. And you know, it appears to be. So I mean, everything's looking good that this is the right alternator. So I'm going to go ahead and reverse the process and cram that thing in there. Another little tip for you here is on the ends of these bolts, you can actually see from here up, I've put some, it's called anti-seize compound on there, and that's to keep them from rusting together, and it makes the bolts easier to get out later. I usually use anti-seize, which makes them easier to get out, or Loctite, which makes them harder to get out on almost every single bolt on the car, just because I work on my cars a lot. And when they get rusted and they're hard to come off and they break maybe, or you have to grind them off or something like that, it's just a real pain. And it's a real pleasure just to be able to pull the bolts out fairly easily and then reuse them again, no problem. Another thing is, don't over tighten things. Every bolt has a torque spec on it, and I have done enough torquing to know that people frequently will over torque when they don't have a torque wrench. I won't be able to get a torque wrench on this because it's just too tight in there. But I can look at the torque spec in the manual, but you don't have to do that. All I'm saying is that, generally speaking, you don't have to tighten as tight as most people think you do. All right, now you have a little bit of a conundrum. Now that this piece is off, how does it go on? Does it go on like that, and then the bolt goes in from there? Or does it go on like that? Because that will change the location of that bolt down there, and it won't go if it's the wrong way around. And to answer your question, it is hold toward the front. The good news is, once you get in, I can't see it down there, that thing pivots around, so if you've got it wrong, you'll pretty much know when you put the bolt in from the front, and you can't get it to line up with the hole, so it kind of doesn't matter. The other thing I forgot to mention is the anti-seize compound I told you about. It's like maple syrup. The minute you open it up, it's on your fingers, it's on the door handle, it's on the dog, it's like everywhere, it gets everywhere, so just, yeah, be real careful with it. Alright, so once you've got the alternator tucked back in where it goes, and I kind of had to manhandle it, you can see it's got some scrapes there and stuff, and you put this bolt in, you can see it's not even all the way in, there's got a bit of a shank going on there, and I put that bolt also not all the way in. This would be the good time to put the belt on, because once you start lifting that up, it's going to get hard to put on there, right? So now you just kind of grab it, and hopefully, so it's come off down there, so I'm going to have to play with this, but I'm going to need both hands, so you know, it just goes back on the way it came off, but put on before you lift this up and put that front bolt in and start tightening things up. Another thing I wanted to mention was, when you put your belt on, make sure that you are actually on. You'll notice this belt is on here, right, just fine. But if you had it only partially on, it'll feel on because there are ribs, and then you maybe just off one rib or so. And you need to make sure that's the same down there and down there on every single one of them, because if even one of them's off, the belt will walk off, shred itself, and I don't know, the axial tilt of the planet will be wrong after that. Okay, so as you tighten it up, you'll suddenly start feeling it getting a little bit, the bolt giving you a little bit of resistance. That's how you know it's getting tighter. And I can feel it starting to get there. Now, how tight to make it? It's always a good question. Some people, again, they don't know much about cars. They may think tighter the better. But the truth is, that's not a good idea, because you can see that the alternator is like that and the belt is like that. And if you tighten it too tight, you're going to be turning, twisting, and putting a lot of pressure on these brackets and things on the alternator, and not to mention the bearings in the front of that alternator. It can go bad quicker. It needs to be snug. And they do make tensioners. You can look up the spec online probably or something like that. You can buy yourself a tensioner, find out how tight to make it, and get like right on. That would be great. I've never done that method or used one of those tensioners. It would be nice. But the truth is, this was squeaking, and it's possible I myself may have tightened it just a tad bit too tight. So what you can do, and if you've put a new belt on in this process, then new belts will stretch a little bit. So you'll maybe get it tight, and then you might hear it squeaking later, and that's because it's loosened up. So you have to go in after 100 miles or whatever, and retighten that. So in my case, I can feel, you should feel in the middle of it and see that it's got some fairly decent, it should be fairly taut. You don't want it, when it spins, it wants to fling the thing off, right? If it does that, it will shred the belt, and of course the car will stop at some point. So I'm, again, not going to go too tight. I think I'm going to underdo it a little. I think I overdid it a little bit last time. So again, I'm just kind of going by feel. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, this is just one of those things you're going to have to learn. That feels pretty tight to me, just about right. So I'm going to stop right there. Now, you do the lock in the bottom, as I mentioned, and then finally you tighten this really big pivot one. Put your connections back on, and you're good to go. That took me 45 minutes, but I'm thinking at least 15 minutes of it was doing the camera and stuff like that. So if you've never done this before, it'd probably take 45 minutes to an hour. If you're, you've done this kind of thing before, then it'll only take you, the same 30 to 45 minutes took me. There we go. And that's the job, except the battery. Now, as I said, I'm going to replace these, so that's a different video. This one's over. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that helps somebody. Again, I think for a V6 Camry, that procedure is probably the same. And you should just listen over the next few days. If you start hearing squeaking and you know the belt's loose, and if it drives normally, then you're probably fine. But just make sure you don't over tighten anything, and do the job just the way I've done, and you should be good to go. Thanks for watching.